social media is designed to make us addicted. It just was. I consulted with a social media application and they wanted me to get people addicted to their app. So, I've seen it from that side. And I think if everyone were to just understand that social media is a place to advertise to you, a place to essentially drive these dopamine centers, essentially get you addicted, which then turns into depression, which then creates another marketable avenue. What are your thoughts here? I'll just pause there for a second.
It makes me so sad because it's so contrived and it's so easy. I mean, I work with so many people who fall into that exact pattern. People come to me because they're depressed. And one of the first things we have to talk about is how much screen time do you have? How are you using your time? What are you doing on social media? And it always surprises me that it just looks like such a direct connect to me. You go from A to B to C to D.
Welcome to the Longevity Formula with Dr. Brandon Crawford. Let's explore the new era of wellness.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the podcast. Here we are on part 2. So part 1, we talked about dopamine. What is it? Where does it come from? Why do we need it? How can we identify challenges with it, etc., right? It was a phenomenal episode. We went in so many different directions. Me and Dr. Jeri LaVigne, obviously, who's joining me for part 2. Sorry, I didn't introduce you. I just went right into it. But here we are for part 2. In part 2, we're largely talking about this concept of dopamine detox, right? And that's something that's been talked about in various circles, and some people agree with it, some people disagree with it. But first, welcome back to the show, Dr. Jeri.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here.
Happy to be here.
Thank you for continuing this discussion on dopamine and its importance, and this really, really important discussion about, do we need a detox from it? So I guess, the first thing to answer is, what is this whole dopamine detox discussion? Because it is kind of confusing. Some people say that's a load of crap, you don't need it. Other people say, you absolutely need to detox from dopamine, right? So I guess here's how I'll start this conversation. Is there, in your opinion, and I didn't prepare Dr. Jeri for this, so
you never do.
That's the fun of it, right? Is there, do you think, an ethical societal consideration where should companies be held liable, if you will, for lack of better words, for how their product or service impacts the dopamine system?
Oh, that's
deep thought, yeah.
Yeah, that's an excellent
I meant
question.
to throw that one out to you before the podcast started, but we started talking and I just wrote it down.
I see how you are.
I thought you could read my mind. I'm sorry.
I know how you are. Wow. Ethically, yeah. I mean, in a perfect world, I would like to think that every product out there and every organization out there is from wanting my highest and greatest good.
Yeah.
Sadly, we know that's not true.
Right.
And so creating a standard of having to stand behind your product or your service in a way that is ethical, I think would be amazing. I'm not exactly sure how to make that happen.
Right. Yeah. And that's the thing. I have no idea what the mechanics of that would look like. It was just a thought, you think about, okay, well, cocaine's regulated, alcohol's regulated, nicotine's regulated. You have to be a certain age and, all this kind of stuff, right? So all of these addictive substances are regulated. Well, what about social media? Social media is very addicting. It's at the heart of, a lot of the discussion that I'm going to talk about today.
Right. Well, and regulation, I mean, just to touch on that for a second, just because something's regulated doesn't mean it's good for you.
True. Yeah.
Right. Doesn't mean it's healthy. They sell a cup of noodles in styrofoam that's full of formaldehyde.
Right.
And you can get like 10 for $1. Right. So what college kid isn't going to pick up buckets of those? Right. So, I mean, it's a tricky topic.
It really is. And I think that really gives a good example of like the difficulty in society, where we're at right now why we're even having this discussion about dopamine detox, digital detox. Do you think that our society, and we can talk about America, Europe, we can talk about, but let's just talk about like, first world country societies that, have this abundance of technology that we're leveraging and that we're using every day. Do you think that this ease of, what am I trying to say? This ease of use, right? For all these highly technological devices. Do you think that this has led us to a place that we have to now start this conversation about dopamine detox?
I think so. And I think that, as we brought up earlier, age is a big factor in this, because someone who's older maybe doesn't spend as much time on social media, is not as drawn. It hasn't always been a part of their life, but we have generations now that they've had access to screens and cell phones since, if not from early elementary school, since birth.
Yeah.
I see some of the families that in practice that, that 3-year-old knows more about that cell phone than I do, kind of thing, and I think, yikes.
Same.
It seems like they just come in knowing. And I think that this is a conversation that I think gets more and more important, especially for younger generations.
Yes.
And that there may be more of a need for, if not just a personal regulation of dopamine. Because again, I'm a big believer in moderation. And I believe that, again, in to build balance in my brain is one thing, but to build balance in a 13-year-old girl's whose entire self-esteem is based on how many likes she gets that day, that's a really different story and a really different model of how you then find balance there. Yeah,
totally. It's a different brain that's been molded. Absolutely. And, on that age topic, just something that I've noticed, and I've talked about this with my wife sometimes, it seems like it's easier. If someone is like, I don't know, I would say maybe 35 years or older, right? It seems like it's easier for that demographic to disconnect from, especially social media. It just seems like, of course we can all get it. And I've seen every age be addicted to social media, literally 80-year-olds.
Sure.
Like, I've seen it. But it does seem like the older you are, the easier it is to disconnect. Do you agree?
I totally agree.
Why do you think that is?
I think it's because, like you said, it's a completely different brain.
Right.
And I have pathways that younger generation doesn't have, because that's been the stimulus.
Right. And that's where I was going to, is that, even myself, right? I remember, I didn't have social media in high school. I didn't, that was
God, I didn't have social media
right?
in high school.
I know. I like we were sitting in an athletic meeting, for Nolan's school yesterday, and just a whole segment was this discussion about phones in the locker room and social media use, and like it was a whole section of discussion, right? That was the first time I was exposed to that, and I was like, wow, like this conversation didn't even exist when I was in high school, right? Which I don't think I'm old, but I mean, I guess we had phones, but I guess I didn't have cameras. So I mean, I don't know. It was a whole different time. But we built pathways that still brought us joy, right? We would go outside and play. We would ride our bike. We would talk with our friends. We would so we have that to lean on. It's like, yeah, I can put my phone down and I'm going to go catch up with my buddy, But now this generation that never built those pathways, they don't know what to do.
Right.
That's a problem.
It's a huge problem. It's a huge problem. Like we were talking about a while ago, people don't understand the necessity for boredom.
Absolutely.
And what incredible creativity comes from that state of boredom. And boredom's not even a word that I like, because I don't ever feel bored. I always can find a way to entertain myself. Right? There's always something I can do, or I can think about, or I can plan, or but now somebody gets, that dopamine starts to, they don't have the stimulus, that dopamine starts to reduce, and they, as a child, will start making noise or squawking or whatever. And in my experience, 9 out of 10 times, then a parent sticks a screen in front of them again.
Right. It's easy.
It's
it helps them not be quiet. It gives them something to focus on. But you're right. Boredom breeds creativity. What would that kid do if they didn't have that digital thing in front of them? They would probably find a stick to play with. They would build a fort in their room. Right. They would go pester their brother and start a fight, but at least it was physical. Right.
Or they'd journal, or they'd write a poem, or they, create something.
Yeah. So maybe, and this is a big topic. Maybe the first thing is like, we need to learn how to let our kids, our younger generation, figure out what that looks like, figure out how to be bored. Right. And I think I shouldn't say it that way. Not just sit there and be bored and go, I'm bored. This sucks. No, I'm bored. What can I do?
Right.
Go figure it out. Go outside, go for a run, go for a walk, go engage with someone else, go start a conversation, start a business plan, start thinking about the future. Right.
Right. Something.
That's huge.
And that's going to build a brain that can handle change and diversity and trauma and not getting my way and having to wait for reward and all of those things that we expect children to be able to do, and we're not giving them any way to do it.
Oh, very good discussion. You're right. 100%. This whole, and I'm not pointing the finger at anyone, and I think it's just lack of education of, why doesn't my kid sit still and concentrate in school? Why doesn't my kid, learn well from, this type of whatever it is. Well, did you set your kid up for success? Right. That's a whole can of worms that, we could get into.
That'd be a good one.
That's another good podcast.
Right.
How to set your kid up for success.
Yeah, and how to learn how they process information and how can you feed it to them in a way that makes sense. And even with this, making a point of we're not going to be on the screen today. We're going to go to the zoo or the museum or whatever. We're going to do something. We're going to learn something. We're going to expand in some way.
Yeah.
I don't care if you go bungee jumping. It's not so much what you're doing, it's that you're doing something else. Right.
I think if my kids go bungee jumping, they'll want to go every weekend. Oh my gosh. Yeah. We've talked about that. Dad, you want to go bungee jumping? Nope. I don't. Sorry. Segue or tangent, whatever. Okay. So that's great. Let's talk. I think we have to have a conversation about the elephant in the room, and that's social media and screens. Do you have a preference on where we go first?
No, you start us.
Okay. I think one thing that people need to understand, I think it would be therapeutic just to understand the mechanisms of social media. So social media was designed to make us addicted. It just was. I consulted with a social media application and they wanted me to get people addicted to their app. That was why I was consulted. So I've seen it from that side. And I think if everyone were to just understand that social media is a place to advertise to you, it's a place to essentially drive these dopamine centers, essentially get you addicted, which then turns into depression,
right?
Which then creates another marketable avenue, right, for that whole situation. What are your thoughts here? I'll just pause there for a second.
Well, it makes me so sad because it's so contrived and it's so easy. I mean, I work with so many people who fall into that exact pattern. People come to me because they're depressed. And one of the first things we have to talk about is how much screen time do you have? How are you using your time? What are you doing on social media? How are you keeping up and those kinds of things? And it's, and it always surprises me that it just looks like such a direct connect to me. You go from A to B to C to D. And when I bring this up sometimes with patients, especially my younger ones, they're like blown away. by that, I had no idea that's part of how I got here. And so it just, I don't know, it's frustrating. And I like social media. I use it professionally. I use it personally. I don't want to sound like I'm talking out of both sides of my mouth, but at the same time, the thought that goes into the manipulation behind it and that push for addiction is scary.
It is scary. And I totally agree with you. Same thing. I use it. I love that I can disseminate information to people that have no idea who I am, never come in contact with me, but I can educate them. I can show them that, hey, there's a different form of healthcare. There's I think there's a lot of useful things there. I think that it's honestly just what it's turned into is what I'm concerned about. And largely in our younger population, because what's put on social media is a touched up version of reality that does not really exist. And it creates a perception and an expectation of societal norms that just shouldn't happen, and that's unfair for our kids today. I mean, it is.
It's completely unfair. And then the parent, so many times in my experience, then the parent saying, get off the phone, get off the phone. Well, then I have to go back to, what do you guys do at dinner time? Does everybody have a phone at the table? Are the phones allowed at the dinner table? Is the television on? Are you watching,
Yeah.
I mean, and I think there's a level of expectation sometimes from parent to child, because maybe the parent has, like we were talking about, has a different brain and can actually do some other things that then creates a level of frustration. But we're also getting a lot of do as I say, not as I do.
Yeah.
And it's confusing.
That is confusing. Yeah, because we lead by example, right? Our actions. I always tell my kids, actions speak louder than words.
Our children do not do what we tell them to. They do what they live.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess, God, there's so many directions we could go here. What are some concepts about social media use that because we're going to be on it. I mean, let's be honest. It's great to be able to catch up, see a glimpse of your grandkids' life or see what your buddies are up to, or I'm not saying that whole experience is bad, but what are some guidelines, some things, how can we think through how to properly use it and not abuse it?
Well, I mean, we talked about, I think that there has to be some kind of limitation.
Yes.
Right. There has to be some kind of limit, and that may be age or situation appropriate. Mm-hmm. I mean, I don't know that there's definite guidelines for every, I don't know. I don't know that that's something that you can set in stone necessarily. And I think even just that, even that limitation then allows for some of those other things we talked about to come into fruition. Because if you're not on the screen, then what are you doing?
Right.
Right. Then you're doing something else, hopefully, instead of just sitting and asking for the phone back, right? Yeah. Or pitching a fit because you don't have the phone. So I think even just a limitation of screen time will start to open up those networks and start to open up those pathways.
100%.
And how do you know when you need a detox? How do you know that's something that's necessary? What are the parts of that? So
I couldn't find a standardized form or some kind of survey or anything like that. It was you need a dopamine detox. I couldn't really find something that was a reliable, objective, measurement tool or something like that. Right. So that's a problem. I almost think that it's kind of like that by design. That maybe that's me being a little too conspiracy theorist or whatever. I try not to be, but because if we're monitoring that, then we're really bringing balance into our life, and we're not so addicted, and we can't be marketed to, and we all this kind of stuff. So you're right. At what point, right, do we go, hey, I need a dopamine detox? And I almost think this is a discussion about really just what does a balanced life look like. We shouldn't be. I do like that on the phone, it will tell you, there's, you can go into your settings and you can see how much was I on my screen today in total? How much was I on social media? How much was I on email? How much did I text? And you can actually measure that. So I like, it's hard to monitor what you don't measure. Right. So I think that number one, we should measure that. If we're on our phone for, 70% of the day, that's probably too much,
Right.
And I can't just give a blanket oh, you should only be on your phone 15% of the day, because
right. It's relative.
It's very relative. It's very relative. And then there's a whole discussion about what if you have Irlen syndrome?
Right. Right. Which gets me into the whole blue light topic. Because I don't think that everybody on the planet has an issue with blue light. Okay. I think you have an issue with blue light if you can't process light correctly.
There you go.
So
there you go. So yeah, you're right. How do we arrive at when do we need to implement a dopamine detox? I know I have some thoughts about it. What are your thoughts about it?
Well, I think that when I look at younger generations, for sure, I think it's a bigger issue than for my generation or yours. And I feel like already we need to be putting something in place that creates some kind of separation, that creates some getting away from the use of the screen so much. I mean, I think we have to start there. I think that any time that it just takes over and we're only looking for where's the next high? Because it's basically a high we're creating, right? Mm-hmm. So where's the next high? And I see it in people my age, and I see it in people your age, and I see it in younger generation. But it gets tricky because that's the last person that wants to do the detox.
Right.
Right? Is the one that you can see is completely driven by that.
Yes. So totally agree with that. What I think we all need to implement just a regular, I don't even know if I'd call it a dopamine detox, just a schedule of, okay, during the week, here's my work schedule. I have to have access to my email or to my whatever, right? What if you're a content creator? You're going to be in front of a screen. That's what you do.
Right.
Well, make sure you get a screen for Irlen and make sure that, you're outside enough. Like, there's strategies there that we can build in to help you maintain a certain level of health and reduce your stress response. But then we also need to schedule in, okay, here, when I go home, I'm going to be purposeful with my spouse. I'm going to be purposeful with my kids. I have to sit my phone down, my computer down. I'm not going to respond to text messages for X period of time, right? And maybe it's the rest of the day. Maybe it's, maybe I'll get one more touch point, right? All of that has to be defined by the person. And I think, my opinion, it needs to be a little uncomfortable.
Oh, agreed.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's got to be a little bit of a stretch.
Yeah. It needs to be like, oh, I want to check my phone right now. Right? Because if you don't feel that, then you're not really resetting those systems.
Agreed.
But then also there's this other time period of the weekend. Weekends and I am very at fault of this, where the weekend really just turns into the time to play catch up, right? All the things I didn't accomplish during the week. Mm-hmm. Apparently that's not what a weekend is.
True.
So really making time, maybe it's one day, maybe it's half a day, maybe it's not both Saturday and Sunday. I can get behind that. But a time that is simply designated to what brings you joy, right? Which is another discussion.
Right.
So that's what I think. I think we all just need to build in this regular schedule. And it needs to be defined on something that's a little uncomfortable, but makes sense for your life.
Right.
And brings joy to you and brings joy to those around you.
And we have to actually implement it.
Well, that would be nice, right?
But I mean, that's the next part of this. That's the next hard step, I think, in this, is making that plan. And making that plan is still a dopamine response.
Yes.
So the follow through of the plan, to me, is where the actual work takes place.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. It's that treadmill syndrome, right? You can get the fanciest, nicest treadmill in the world, but if it just turns into a clothes hanger, not doing you any good.
Exactly.
Absolutely. That's good. Okay. I loved your discussion about creativity and how it's the same part of the brain as schizophrenia. And like, I just want to go there because it was very enlightening to me. And I loved the discussion around it. So lead us down that path if you don't mind. Okay.
So if you're looking at a brain scan, right, ventrolateral prefrontal cortex. And we talked in the earlier episode about that's the part of the brain that lights up when you're building a model or when you're breaking one down. What's interesting is schizophrenia and bipolar to a certain extent, but more so schizophrenia, that exact part of the brain is what lights up for a schizophrenic. right? That's one of the ways that now we use brain scans in order to help diagnose. And so if that's part of the home of creativity and it's also the home of schizophrenia, then maybe we're a little schizophrenic when we're creative, right? Because what are we doing? We're stopping the inhibitions of reality. We're stepping outside of the mold. We're stepping outside of the model, and we're breaking through that model to look past it, right? Well, yes, I know we've always done this way. Look at healthcare and what the clinic offers and what you offer is, yes, it's always been done this way, but guess what? That's not working for this enormous amount of our population. And so you had to do that exact thing where you break that model and build a new one. Yeah. Right. And so when we inhibit those aspects of, because, like in a family, that whole idea of when I'm working with somebody and we're working on making more money or we're working on just more success or those kinds of things, when they just want to feel more just productive or prosperous, whatever, that whole, well, nobody in our family does that. What are you doing? That's not what we do. Right. Kind of thing. And so this is kind of like that. It's that breaking through point. It's that. So in schizophrenia, we don't inhibit. We totally abstract. We don't adhere to things that have been important before. We just let whatever there is come in. And that's kind of what happens in creativity. Yeah.
I totally agree. I mean, my biggest breakthrough moments have not been when I'm sitting down going, I'm going to solve this problem. I'm going to get my coffee and get my pen and paper and let's think. That is first of all, I don't do that. But my moments of honestly, I've had a lot of aha moments. I have an outdoor shower. It's been 10 o'clock at night. I'm in the outdoor shower. I'm looking up at the stars and I'm like, holy smokes, that's a great idea. I wasn't thinking about anything. Right. And it's almost like that network just turns on. Right. But it's when I'm out there literally just paying attention to the water running over my body, listening to the crickets, looking at the stars, just kind of getting back to creation. Exactly.
Connecting with source, right?
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. And that's literally when I have my best aha moments. So maybe I'm a little schizophrenic in that moment. If so,
not a bad thing.
If so, bring it on. Right? I mean, as long as I'm not, I can turn that off at some points in time. Right. Oh man. That's a really cool topic that I love thinking about that and how we can use these, what someone consider an imbalance. And sure, it's imbalance if you can't regulate it properly and whatnot, but how that really creates this diversity of brain strengths that some of us are really good at these things and some people aren't.
And some of the things that we rely on day to day are inventions or ideas or art that have come from what you would call an imbalanced brain, what you would call a schizophrenic or a bipolar brain.
Big time. Einstein, Tesla, you name it. These were not just regular people that, they would be considered autistic and all kinds of things, right? Bipolar.
Things. Yeah.
I mean, weren't you saying Einstein was probably bipolar? Is that what you were saying?
Yes, Einstein was bipolar. Tesla was schizophrenic.
Absolutely. Yeah. And definitely on the spectrum. I mean,
right. But, and had incredible breakthroughs and discoveries and things they'll be known for forever. And at the same time had incredibly difficult lives and not happy lives.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Well, we can take this in any direction you want to, but I think people would appreciate, let's start talking about some of these strategies, right? Okay. That one can use. We've already talked about a few. I think it's extremely important, again, for people to understand social media a little bit deeper. And we already talked about, some ways you can use it, not use it, et cetera. I think an obvious one is just time limits. And this is time limits on social media, screen use, anything. You can put a time limit on anything.
Any screen.
But I mean, I think it's very important because that helps us build inhibitory pathways, that helps us build discipline, and it helps us not just succumb to that urge, that dopamine crash to reach and grab and do. And right. So I think time limits that's kind of the easy one, right? It's a low hanging fruit.
Easiest one to define for sure.
Absolutely. I don't necessarily have specific time limit guidelines that I could really think of. Do you have any thoughts on that?
No, I think it's situational, honestly. You did a video, but I think information around it's so important. You did a video a while ago with Nolan hooked up with looking at a QEEG and his brain on a screen.
Correct.
Right?
Oh, that was a long time ago.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, okay, that was interesting because he would always play this video game, and I forget what it was. It was Minecraft or Roblox, or I don't know what it was. And I was like, Nolan, that's not good for your brain. That's not good for your brain. He was like, you can't prove that. And I was like, yeah, I can. And so I took him into the office, put the QEG on him. I was like, here's your brain, not on the game, right? And we looked at it, and we talked about it. And as soon as he started playing it, that brain changed. And I showed him like, okay,
right.
Look,
you started to shut down, right? Didn't
absolutely.
prefrontal cortex started to shut down? You
started to see slow wave activity, in the frontal lobe, prefrontal cortex, et cetera. They started to dumb him down, right? And it was eye opening for him. He actually understands. He's a pretty smart guy. He was like, wow, like, not saying he completely stopped playing it, which was not my intent, but just to help build in time
to
limits.
show the reason for moderation.
Yeah, absolutely, which is super, super important. I'm going to go back to my discussion of it needs to be uncomfortable. So, if you're like, hey, I can be off of social media for 1 hour a day, no problem. Great, let's do 3.
Right.
Oh, that's a little too uncomfortable. I can't do that. Okay, we'll start with 2. Is that uncomfortable? That's a little uncomfortable. Okay, start there. And then, next week, let's try 2.5 hours. It needs to be uncomfortable, in my opinion. And we already talked about that. So set your time limits appropriately, right? And that's for screen, that's for social media. Honestly, it's for anything that's just kind of pulling you in, sucking you in, right?
Right.
Gratitude. We talked about it in part 1.
We did.
Let's talk about it again because it needs it, right? We need to talk about this again.
Okay.
So strategies to utilize gratitude to help us overcome this dopamine addiction situation. Go.
Okay. So there are lots of things you can do. You can do a gratitude journal, which is often helpful. So in a gratitude journal, you're going to write down, pick a number, 3, 5, 10 things that you're grateful for every day. The writing is nice. That's a visual activity, not a kinesthetic activity. So it's going to connect to more parts of the brain. So much of the information we take in is visual. It's going to light more up. So I think that's really helpful. I like mine, where you just have to think of 3 things that you're grateful for every morning and then reach out to one person during the day for whom you're grateful. So you can send them a text or an email or, a social media contact if it's within your time frame.
Right, there you go.
Otherwise, call them. Say
right,
hi.
there you go.
Leave them a voicemail if they're not available. I think those things are important. And just spending time when we're grateful for someone or grateful for a situation, I think it's important to sit in that a little bit. Oh yeah, I'm super grateful for, my friend, and I can check these off real quickly, but to really sit in it for a few minutes. And why am I so grateful for this person? Or why am I so grateful for this situation? And create a whole visualization around that gratitude. And find where do you feel that in the body? Where does that live in you? And what does that look like? And there's studies that show anytime you're doing a visualization, when you're in that visualization and you're creating this landscape, this situation, you want to be able to do a 360-degree turn. You don't want just the projection of that out in front of you. You want to know that you're in it. And that holds so much more meaning than just the projection of that. So like when we're doing the V-cell procedures, a lot of times with those visualizations, I'll ask somebody to, where are you? Like we had somebody who wanted to drive his brand new truck, right? and he was in the mountains of Colorado and the window was down and he could feel the air and he could look in the rearview mirror and he could see behind him. Mm-hmm. Those kinds of things will really exponentially create a greater degree of gratitude in the brain.
Absolutely. And we talked about the neurology, the neurochemistry behind gratitude in part 1. So definitely want people to go back and listen to that if you haven't listened to it. But super important, very therapeutic, and honestly just helps to shape a proper society. Right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And you can't be in gratitude and fear at the same time.
Right.
And that's a big one. So I use it a lot with anxiety as a precursor. It's hard to pull somebody out of a panic attack in the middle of one by asking them to be grateful.
Right.
But if they'll spend more time on gratitude, then sometimes we don't ever get to that escalation.
Yeah, absolutely. I've done this a few times. It's harder for me to do with a guy because with a woman that has had birth and the birth was a positive experience, I have been able to a few times take that woman back to that experience. Right. I had someone that was in a complete panic attack and I just said, okay, do you remember when you were giving birth? Yes. There was not a soul on this planet that was able to help you. You were on your own. And she was like, yeah, I remember that. I'm like, do you remember how strong you were when you pushed this kiddo out and everything went well? And after that, how did you feel? And she was like, oh my God, I felt this release, this sensation of love, they got this huge surge of oxytocin and this whole, this whole neurochemistry, and connecting them back to that about how powerful they are. That's another discussion, but
but that's a brilliant somatic exercise.
Right. It's been interesting to watch how that has worked for some people, but clearly if the birth didn't go well and all this, there's strings attached, but
you can go back to a favorite childhood pet.
Yes.
Right. Or a situation where you felt powerful, where you felt taken care of,
right.
Where you felt safe.
Yeah, absolutely. I like to talk about movement, right? As far as strategies that we need to deploy in order to help us overcome this dopamine addiction, if you will. I talked about that a little bit on part 1, but go outside. If you're struggling to disconnect from a screen, if you're struggling to disconnect from social media, from email, from whatever, go outside, take a walk, go do some push-ups, go do some squats, go do some wall sits, go do. That's the thing, is go do. And that movement is going to start to stimulate your brain and help you to be okay with not being on a screen. I think that's very important. And again, time is so relative here, and that's why I just hesitate to put time restrictions.
Right. Well, and I liked what you said. I think we have to use the concept of distraction in a different way.
Right.
Because now, instead of the screen being a distraction, we are distracting ourselves from the screen.
There you go.
Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think that's important to look for. And we do the same thing with anytime we're building different neuroplasticity. We're always building neuroplasticity is a point that I think sometimes gets overlooked. We're always building it.
Always.
So we want to build what has been termed positive neuroplasticity, in that it works for us in a positive way, I guess, is how you'd look at that. I don't know. I'm not crazy about the terminology, quite frankly. But that distracting, it doesn't matter how many times you have to pull yourself back or pull yourself away. Just in doing that pulling, we know that we are creating a different pathway. And that's really, I think, important for people to understand is, man, I totally screwed that. I thought about my phone every 15 seconds, even though I wasn't looking at it. Mm-hmm. Right. But you're pulling yourself away from that same thought.
Right.
And so we're headed in the right direction.
Absolutely. And that's what, okay, yes. So it's that pain pleasure response.
Right.
100%. Absolutely. And that's why I do cold plunges. That's why I run until I start to get tunnel vision. That's why, it's the same thing. Like that pain, that uncomfortableness, like that is something that is almost good in a way in this mindset of what we're trying to achieve.
Right.
And it doesn't mean you failed just because you could not disconnect fully. You're starting to make new pathways.
Exactly.
It's not easy. You don't take a 3-month-old baby, stand them up on their feet and say, walk. good luck. They're going to fall.
Right.
There's not a baby. Well, I don't know. I don't know if I can say this statement. I was going to say there's not a baby on the planet that didn't, walk or just stand up and start walking, right? And didn't fall, right? That doesn't happen. That you have to make new pathways and then prune new pathways, make them more efficient. It's a whole process. And
it doesn't happen overnight.
And it doesn't stop.
Right.
You don't ever stop. Like even now, my gait continues to be altered.
Right.
Even though I've been walking for a very long time.
True. Oh, that's fair. That's a good point.
Absolutely. My thought patterns continue to change. The way my intonation continues to change. Go look at recordings from me 5, 6, 7 years ago. I spoke differently. Right?
Right.
Well, I've been speaking for a very long time.
Nice.
We will always continue to build plasticity and continue to change. Yeah.
And this is one of those places where I think the balance is so important there, right? Especially with, it's hard because I know it's hard for me to put it down. It's hard for me to not, there are lots of people wanting my attention and I'm involved in different businesses. And so all of that, I feel like I have to keep my hand on the phone to keep it going kind of thing.
Yeah.
And at my age, I know that I have a lot of other neural pathways that this hasn't always been the focus. So for the young ones, especially, it's so important that we learn to create some kind of balance.
Yes.
Right. That we learn to be able to step away from it and it not be the end of the world.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And then we already touched on this concept of boredom breeds creativity, right? Do you think that it's better to do some type of activity that promotes you creating something like a workbook or something like this? Or do you like what I was talking about where you're just kind of opening yourself up, allowing things to try? That maybe not everyone can do that,
Maybe not, because I'm more that way too.
Yeah.
I'll just be thinking about nothing, or I'm sitting on a plane and the guy in the next aisle is taking off his shoes and put his feet on the wall or, whatever. And you're just like, wow, who raised you? And then bam, something comes,
right.
Of, oh, we could do this, or here's an idea. Or so I'm more that way, but I don't know if that's because I'm a product of my generation or my experiences. Right. So initially, if that is just absolutely the most painful thing you can think of is just to sit and try to entertain yourself with your own thoughts, then I would want something to take the thought. I'd want the attention to be able to go somewhere.
Yes.
And if you need something to do, I don't think there's anything wrong with that.
Right. I agree.
And there may very well be people who are not young who don't process like we do and things just don't pop in.
Yes.
A lot of times when I get blocked, I'm right-handed dominant. So a lot of times if I feel like when you talked earlier about that whole situation about I'm going to figure this out. And sometimes I get in a time thing where I kind of have to figure this out.
Yes.
Right. And so I will write with my left hand and I am not ambidextrous in any form. And so that is painful and uncomfortable. And I start thinking of 1,000 different things, and 9 out of 10 times something either starts to come together there in that writing, or it gets me back to that place where I am so open that I can have other thoughts.
Yeah.
Does that make so? There are lots of little things to do.
Sure.
To distract.
Absolutely. I think that's great. Yeah, absolutely. I like that idea. I like that concept. That movement then spark, because we have our blueprint: sensory drives movement, and movement drives cognition.
Right.
So you're just accessing a different part of the brain by changing how you move.
Right.
That's there's more to it than that, but I love that concept. That's great. I like the idea of, if you are that person that doesn't necessarily know how to just kind of disconnect or, sit under the stars and like what I was talking about, that's a good opportunity to implement learning, right? So read a book. What topic do you want to learn more about? Do you want to learn a language? This is a good opportunity to read an actual book or, learn an actual thing, right? A skill, a hobby, right? That was another thing on the list.
Right.
Learn a skill, develop a hobby, right? Those are things. It's hard for me to think about a hobby because I don't have time to have a hobby at this point in time. But apparently that's a thing, right?
Apparently.
But here's a question. Should that hobby be joyful? Should it bring you joy? Is that not a requirement?
Oh, absolutely. It should bring you joy.
Thank you.
Absolutely. So my grandmother was going to teach me. I mean, my grandmother could make her own lace. Like she could sew, she could crochet, she could do all the things. Mm-hmm. And she was going to teach me to sew. And this was going to be so much fun. And we were going to do this together. And it was going to be like our thing. It is painful. It is difficult. I am not any good at it. I don't like to do things that I can't eventually feel some level of success in.
Right.
And so, and she was so devastated because I hated it. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to please her. I mean, I'm a pleaser. I wanted to please her. Right. I wanted this to be our thing. Mm-hmm. This was new and different and something I didn't have any idea how to do. And I had no understanding that I wasn't going to be that I wasn't going to be able to do this. Mm-hmm. Right. I mean, and she didn't try to set me up to fail. It was just, I love this. I do this. We can do this together. I can pass this down to you. Yeah. And oh my gosh, it was miserable. And so sadly, it's something we didn't wind up doing together, but because it brought me zero joy, it's got to be fun.
Right.
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 And I think you have to feel like you have either that it's a kind of situation where you go to the museum or the zoo or wherever you like to visit because those things are fun, that brings you joy to look at that work or those kinds of things, or it's something where you can feel a modicum of success.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. Absolutely. And that, interesting conversation, right? So I was talking with another patient, right? And talking about, okay, what do you do for you time? Like, what does that look like? And I think, I know they answered a way that they thought I would approve of as their provider, right? So they said, well, I like to run. I like to meditate. I like right. And I'm like, okay. So you're telling me that if your spouse took the kids and there was nothing that you needed to do, there was not, right? You get to do anything that you want to do for the next 2 hours, right? Or 1 hour, whatever. You would go for a run. And she goes, absolutely not. And I'm like, okay, you would meditate. And she was like, hell no, I wouldn't meditate. I'm like, okay, what would you do? And she's like, I would lay in my bed and read this book that I started, and I'm like, that's your joyful thing you need to be doing. Yeah. I mean, it's great to run. It's great to meditate. It's great to do all those things. And I think you should do some type of exercise. It doesn't have to be running. Right. Right. But these moments, they need to be joyful. They need to be something that you enjoy doing.
Yes.
And that's the discussion on the dopamine, right? Like if you're just doing it just to do it, you're not really accomplishing what we need to accomplish.
Exactly. And so while I know I do exercise and I do meditate and I do all the other things, my thing is 2 hours in the pool on a float.
There you go.
Just let me lie here.
Absolutely.
And sometimes I think of stuff and sometimes I don't.
Yeah.
But man, I get out of the pool 2 hours later and I couldn't be happier.
Absolutely.
And home has understood now that this is really important. And yes, there's this whole list of things for Jeri to do because she's been out of town for 12 days. But if it's not
just
raining.
12 days this time?
Well, usually. And if it's not raining, that's where you will find me the first morning off, right? Or I'm even that first day back, I'm arranging patients around I have no problem walking into an appointment with wet hair,
right.
I mean, I know I have to have that time.
Right.
So
yeah,
you're exactly right. You have to find what brings you joy, what brings you some level of peace.
Yes.
Whether it makes sense to anybody else or not that's not important.
That's irrelevant.
Yeah.
100%. And I guess that's a good discussion of, if you don't understand why your spouse or your significant other or your friend or whatever, wants to do the thing that they do, you don't have to understand it.
No.
I mean, I don't understand why that is.
I come out of the pool a much nicer person than the person who went into the pool. I can tell you right now.
100%.
And
yes.
So why not give me 2 hours?
Yes.
It's
absolutely.
to their benefit.
Yes. And so sometimes it makes sense. Sometimes it's like, oh yeah, run. Oh yeah, meditate. Get in your sauna. Do your cold plunge, whatever. Sometimes it doesn't make sense.
Right.
And that's okay. That's totally fine. Cool. So yeah, do something you enjoy. You do something you love, you enjoy, you want to do, something that pulls you in. It's so important to engage in those activities, right? As long as you're healthy and they're not hurting other people. The thing that I have last on the list, and I have it last, I think it's a big topic. I think it's one that I struggle with. It's just being present, right? Because we kind of talked about, okay, I can set my phone down over there and I can be with my kids, but am I really with my kids? And that's hard. Maybe that's just hard for me. I don't know. But holy smokes, is that hard? Because I can put my phone a mile down the road, but my mind is still going through the conversations that are on the phone. My mind is still going through those emails. My mind is still going through that, right? So I don't know. Do you have any help for me on this topic?
So I think this is a place where somatic exercises really come in handy, because they make you be present. So for you especially, movement's important. Mm-hmm. And you're more in your body when you're moving, right? And so take a walk with the kids, or even just sit in the grass outside, right? Or stick your feet in the water, whatever, those kinds of things when you're being present. And then in the conversation, and this is just the truth, it does not matter how engaged we are with the person that we're with. Most of us are thinking about 6 or 7 other things simultaneously. That's just what we do, right? And so that even while you're having conversation with that person, instead of doing all of those conversations, feel the chair, your feet on the ground, the sun on your face, the breeze in your hair. Those kinds of things will help keep you more present. The more we do them, the more automatic that becomes, and we just do it without thinking, and then we're just there.
Nice. I like that. So it's like bringing your physical presence, like almost grounding you.
Yes,
right?
Yeah. It's all about grounding.
That's good. Yeah, that's good. Yeah. I know that's probably the biggest thing I struggle with, right? Because I can turn my phone off, but I can't. I struggle turning this off. I struggle turning my brain off.
Well, and I think too, at some point, maybe in another discussion, we could get into more how we process, because we all process the same, different, I should say, in Thailand. So, but there are basic categories in which we fall as far as processing goes: visually, auditorily, and kinesthetically, consciously, subconsciously, and unconsciously. So the trick is, which one do we do on which level? Yeah. So if I'm very visual. And so if we're making eye contact, I can sit and be still and I can talk to you. I'm visual on a conscious level. I'm auditory on a subconscious level. I'm kinesthetic on a subconscious level, and kinesthetic on an unconscious level. So like if I go in for a massage and the massage therapist wants to talk, I'm doomed. Because I can't have that conversation and relax.
Gotcha.
Right? I can't walk into the grocery store holding hands with somebody and remember why I'm there.
Oh, interesting.
Right?
Yeah.
So I think too, not only in the being present is it important to do that somatic work and to be grounded, but it's also really important to know how you process.
That's great.
And how the person you're dealing with processes.
We need to do a whole podcast on that.
Yeah.
Because that you wrote like a thesis on that or something, didn't you?
Yeah, that was my EDD.
That's nice. That's good. Oh my gosh, yeah. I need to learn and lean into that more, because that's a huge topic that could really help in so many different ways.
Right.
Yeah, that's good. Well, cool. Well, I got so caught up in listening to that I kind of forgot where we were going to go next, just to be honest. What is there anything else? Go for it.
A little bit. We touched on this in the first one, but again, I think too, when we talk about looking for a distraction, or we talk about stepping away from the digital, instead of just being in that vacuum of reducing dopamine, is to build up the endorphins, the serotonin, the oxytocin, right? Those things in the brain. And so It's just important to look for activities that do that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Right. One of the reasons I think the pool works so well for me is I like the sun and builds serotonin.
Absolutely.
Right. And I'm calm and I'm happy when I get that time in the sun. Right. The oxytocin when you're when you're having conversation. So, and it's one of the nice things that the distractions that we're talking about do build those chemicals. Mm-hmm. I just think the more conscious we are about building those other chemicals, I think then the more we start to focus on them. Anytime we're focusing on that, then we're not thinking about the phone. Sure.
So I know where I was going to go, and your discussion kind of brought that back to me, but I think it's important to note, so I'm not anti-drinking, right? I mean, I'll drink a good tequila every now and then. Obviously, I'm not going to go drink an entire bottle in a night, right? Or if I do, it's going to be a wild morning,
Right.
So at what point is it okay, not okay to, in these moments where it's like, okay, I need to wind my mind down. I need to not be on social media. I need to not continue to work on my emails. Man, this would be a lot easier if I just had a few shots of tequila in me. And, obviously that alcohol is GABAergic, and then there's other discussions about what reduces integrity of the prefrontal cortex, the cerebellum, all these things. And we don't have to just pick on alcohol. I mean, we can talk about any substance, in the world. There's also a dopamine response with alcohol. There's a dopamine response with hearing the pop of the beer can.
Oh, for sure.
So
because it's the anticipation.
Exactly. So at what point is that okay, not okay?
Oh, God, I don't know. I mean, I don't know.
I know. Yeah, it's
That's hard.
Right? Yeah, because, there's
and then you have to take other things into consideration.
100%.
Toleration of.
Yes, and that's that's where I'm going, right? Is obviously if you have alcoholism as part of your background or your family lineage or something like that, this could be a bigger issue for you, right? And maybe we want to be better about how we regulate that for that person. If it's not,
but then, okay. So yeah, but then even when you look at how well does my system handle inflammation?
Right.
How well does my gut work?
Yeah. Do I have a gluten issue? If I drink just one, so when I was growing up, right. So I'm small town Texas. If you didn't go out and drink a beer in a cow pasture, you were not part of the cool kids, right? And so I did a lot of beer drinking in cow pastures.
Right.
I thought I was hungover. I was not hungover. I was intolerant to gluten. It didn't matter if I drank one beer or 25. I was in the bathroom the entire next day, right? So, yeah, what's your inflammatory load? What's your neurochemistry look like? What's your autoimmunity look like?
And I will partake as do you, but at the same time, is there anyone on the planet for whom this is actually healthy?
Right.
Is this ever really a good idea?
Exactly. Yeah. It's not like we have an alcohol deficiency.
Right.
And that's why our mind is racing.
Right.
Oh, your mind is racing.
Here.
You have a lack of vitamin T. Here's your tequila, right?
I like it.
Right. Yeah. So it's one of those things. I've heard great discussions on this. You obviously being in the health and longevity space and part of the biohackers, there's some people they'll tell you, no, never, no, you can't have one drop and you have to extend your life and all this kind of stuff. I'm like, but what if a little bit makes me have a better life, right? A more fun, a fuller life. That's an interesting conversation to have, right? Because even people like Dr. Attia, he'll, kind of side with me on this one where it's like, well, yeah, I like a good tequila every now and then. I think Dr. Huberman has said the same thing. So it is about that understanding what you're doing to yourself. I think that's very important. Understanding the potential ramifications. I'm not going to reach for a beer, but a good, clean tequila is okay for me, right?
On occasion.
And understanding that, right? Very, very important. So cool. Anything else you want to add to that one? That was a fun discussion.
That was good. No, I think I'm good. I'd rather you have tequila than sugar. So
yeah. Oh, yeah, totally. Well, it's
sugar
funny.
Really is the devil.
It's funny how we think about that, right? Because it's like, hey, do you want to go eat 6 cookies? No, why would I do that? That's no way. Hey, you want a few shots of tequila? Bring it on. Let's go. It's like our minds, but that's our mindset, right?
Right.
Where, and you go into a home that has been, that's in the Bible Belt, and they've been raised that, in a certain way and whatnot, and they'll totally take the 6 cookies.
Right.
Right. And that's not always the case. I'm just using that as an example of like, is that really more health promoting? The older Hispanic culture actually used tequila as a gut tonic, right?
Right.
It was a good prebiotic. It's higher in inulin. So, maybe it has good health promotion benefits too. Anyway, I feel like we should get a sponsor.
My gosh, I was just thinking exactly the same thing. Wonder what Don Julio's doing right now.
Don Julio, Addictivo. We should get a sponsor for this episode. That would be very good. Anyway.
Great minds.
Oh man. Well, I guess you can see where our mind is going. We've been in this podcast studio for several hours now talking about dopamine in front of bright lights. Our dopamine systems, I know mine is starting to crash. Do you have anything else that you want to add to this conversation?
God, I think we kind of covered it. I think that if you're watching this segment and you wonder if a dopamine detox or stepping away from it a little bit would be a good idea, then I think it's worth exploring.
Yeah, absolutely.
I really do. And if you are adamant that this is not a good idea, I think it's definitely worth exploring.
Absolutely. I think that person is probably the one that should reach out to a provider.
Yes, to get a little support while doing this.
Right. And unfortunately, that person's probably not the one that's going to do it. So it's going to, take some assistance from a loved one or, someone like that. But, the more stubborn you are about this topic, the more you need it, most likely.
I think so.
Yeah. Well, cool. Well, thank you so much for joining me again.
Thanks for having me.
Maybe we should just stick around and do a part 3. I don't know.
We'll think of something.
I think it's lunchtime. I'm getting really hungry.
Okay.
But again, really thank you so much. I appreciate your input and all your help on everything we do and just being so accessible to, for me, but then also for our patients to help them navigate through some really, really difficult times.
Thanks. I appreciate the work.
And for all you people out there that found this information interesting or enlightening or helpful in some way, please help us get this information out there because there's someone that that could benefit from this information. And that's why we're here. We're here to help others. So please share this content, like this content, follow this channel, whatever that is. I don't know how that works. But anyway, help us get this information in front of more people. So thank you so much, and we will see you next time.
We hope today's episode has inspired you to take that next step toward your best self. Remember, the path to longevity is paved with small, daily decisions. Your journey is unique, and every step, every choice, brings you closer to your ultimate vision of a healthier, happier life. For more insights, tips, and resources, visit drbrandоncrawford.com.